It's my pleasure today to introduce our research roadmap. This is a piece of work that is really pivotal, as Kath's explained, to how we are approaching Prader-Willi research in Australia. So the purpose of the roadmap, first and foremost, was to ensure that we were having maximum impact and delivering the best possible outcomes that we could for our families. So we wanted to identify areas of overlap between unmet need, and that's the unmet need as defined by families, and find the places where that overlapped with Australian research expertise. So we may be a small country, we can't necessarily cover every area of Australian research, but there are most definitely spaces where we are absolute cutting-edge world leaders. Spaces like epigenetics, neuroscience, digital healthcare, and many more. So the purpose of the roadmap was to identify those sweet spots, if you like, where unmet need overlapped with world-leading Australian expertise. This information was intended to inform how we then invest the very precious funding that we're entrusted with. So again, making sure that we are maximising the impact of what we're doing. Thirdly, we wanted a document that would give us a really strong voice in advocacy, something that we could take to government to advocate for additional funding, something that we could take to donors, but also something we could give to scientists to use to back up their grants and applications in terms of seeking funding as well. So again, everything focused on maximising outcomes and efficiencies, focused on getting as much impact as possible and improving the lives of people with Prader-Willi syndrome. The principles that we've brought to this as an organisation, first and foremost, this document and all the work that we do is driven by the unmet need as defined by the community. So this is the family survey results Kath was pointing to before, and I'll come back to that at the end. Our goal is to uplift the quality of life for people with Prader-Willi syndrome. Underpinning all of this from a scientific perspective is rigorous, evidence-based, hypothesis-driven science that focuses on the underlying mechanisms and how they can then be unpacked and lead to better therapies and better health outcomes. As an organisation, we appreciate that there is a need to take a few risks, and Kath referred to the risks that our scientists take in jumping on board with Prader-Willi research. So we see ourselves as a learning organisation that manages and balances that risk. So we're going to look for interesting projects, we're looking for seed funding, we're looking for creative ways to do things, but we're managing that against the risks that we are taking, and underpinning all of that, to come back to it again, is maximising the impact that we can have as well. The process of writing the research roadmap looks quite simple when it's written up like this. We reviewed and collated all of the information around unmet need, ran a family survey so we could ensure that what's available globally matched our Australian experience. We conducted an overview, a scoping scan of the literature to see where the fields were at. We spoke with a lot of people, identifying where our areas of Australian expertise and strength were, and then we conducted a number of expert interviews. And looking around the room, many of you will recognise this process because you were the experts whose doors we knocked on. So thank you very much for your contributions to this roadmap. And this is where we landed. So we have 4 guiding, still working on some of the language, we have 4 focus areas. The top one is care. So care is to develop innovative models to deliver best practice clinical care. So this is around the establishment of the National Centre for Prader-Willi Expertise. It's about learning and growing and making sure that what is delivered is absolutely top-notch, best practice, and Professor Honeyhäusler will expand on that later. We're also keen to grow Prader-Willi syndrome clinical trials expertise. This one spans both care and treat, and again goes to growing the evidence base for the therapies that are available today. Second area is treat. So this is more of a research focus. We're looking to accelerate treatments that target the most debilitating symptoms And that includes clinical trials as well, because a lot of the new therapies, the phase 2, 3 and sometimes 4 trials are going to be the fastest pipeline to new therapies. So we have a focus here on hyperphagia and PWS behaviours, including some mental health aspects. And we're keen to use innovative research tools that can add clarity. So when we look at the literature in this field, on these fields, what we find is there is a large volume of knowledge, but a lot of it is correlative. So we don't really know exactly what's causing the problem. We know what correlates with the problem. So what we want to do under this banner is to look for really innovative research tools, for example, AI, some of the new technologies that are coming out, to see if we can provide clarity to the field and assist in identifying targets. So this is all scoped around accelerating research. The third bubble there is transform. So we're here again looking to accelerate research, but this time we're looking at gene activation. So approaches that will target the underlying cause and through targeting that underlying cause lead to a much more transformative impact for individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome. So here again we're looking to identify disease-modifying targets. Some are already known and some are not. And we're exploring relative technologies and tools. So I was at the ICG, the International Congress of Genetics, last week, and the pace of development in the field of gene activation and genetics in general is massive. So under this area of research, we'll be looking to access, maximise, encourage, engage, all those good things to get those breakthroughs applied where they're relevant, applied to Prader-Willi syndrome. We're also keen to explore solutions to some of the barriers to success, and the key one here would be delivery. So we can come up with phenomenal ways of activating genes, but then we have to make sure we can actually deliver that to the right location. And there are a number of those sort of downstream barriers, if you like, that if we can begin to understand what they are and address them now and bring those technologies through concurrently, we believe that has the potential to accelerate getting those therapies to families faster. And again, we have Rob Nichols in the room and Marnie Blewett, David, just a phenomenal number of scientists here are going to speak to some of these technologies with transformative potential. Finally, the last one is connect, and this one is woven through everything that we do. So as a foundation, a very large part of what we do is connect people in all sorts of different ways. We connect with government, we connect scientists with scientists, we connect families with clinicians, we connect in so much of what we do. So put very succinctly, we're looking to promote funding, we're looking to promote awareness, collaboration in all of its forms, and all of that is intended to support accelerating that research, maximising our input, making therapies available to families as quickly as we can. So to round that out, I've got an extra slide. I wanted to come back just before we finish. So we start and finish with unmet need. When we looked at the global literature around unmet need, consistently we see the top 3 priorities for families and for people with Prader-Willi syndrome are reactivating the silent genes, that's our transformative therapies, targeting hyperphagia, and a range of PWS behaviours and mental health issues. Consistently, almost every survey comes out with those top 3. They were also consistent with our Australian experience as well. I had the honour and the pleasure and the privilege of joining Georgina's group of adults in Sydney back in 2022. When I asked them what they wanted scientists to work on, these 4 adults with Prader-Willi syndrome, this is what they told me. They said, I want a cure. That's our transformative therapies reactivating genes. They said, stop hitting myself when I get angry. That's targeting PWS behaviours. Can you fix the signalling so our brains know we're full? That's our research on hyperphagia. And finally, what can scientists do now? So that's where the Centre of Expertise falls in. How can we deliver what's available now better? So as I said, we begin and end with unmet need, and I will add one more here just to acknowledge the, not just the experts in the room, but experts across Australia who have contributed to the roadmap. We could not have pulled this together without your deep experience and insights, so it's very much appreciated as well. Now, it is my very great pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, Professor Cathy Vaughan from the University of Melbourne. Cathy is a public health researcher with a focus on inequities. She works at MISH, which is the Methods and Implementation Support Hub for Clinical and Health Research Labs. We're so lucky and privileged to have Cathy joining us today. I'm delighted to welcome her. Are we bringing the panel up now, or are you going to talk first and then? Yeah, excellent. All right, so yeah, we'll move some seats across. So Cathy's going to be joined by a family panel of parents and people with Prader-Willi syndrome. And I have neglected to actually ask who's doing the introductions on that front. Is that me? Cathy's going to do that? Okay. All right. So if our family members would like to come up, if you're comfortable to do so. And I'm going to embarrass myself a little bit. So. This one. So these amazing people have given up their time to join us today. And I'm going to be bringing it to here. Amanda, Libby, Catherine, Elizabeth, and Vanessa. So welcome and thank you all for joining us.
I might actually get you all to introduce yourselves, if that's okay, and I might get one of the roving mics, which I saw, and oh, you've all got, yep, that's all right, fabulous. And I was going to get you to say, well, you've already introduced yourself, but who your child is, and a little bit about what makes them them, but also what about Prader-Willi makes their life challenging, and what's one or two things that you think researchers could do that would change or research could change your life.
Just some little questions.
Questions.
So my name's Marnie. I'm from Torquay, and so that's in Victoria for anyone that's travelled around. So my husband and I, my husband Vaughan, have two young boys. So Emerson, who's 4.5, going on 14, and Austin, who lives with Prader-Willi syndrome, who's almost 2. And the question around what makes Austin amazing is so many things. He is just a happy kid, always smiling, super social. We love travel, and we've managed to go on a couple of trips, and he's just always searching for people's, gaze to try and get them to look at him and really engage. I think everyone has mentioned it before, but those piercing eyes really get all of his therapists, all of his doctors, and anyone that comes in contact with Austin is just besotted by him and his beautiful crazy hair and personality. In terms of challenges, obviously that's a massive question. There they are. Obviously, us being in the early stages, the challenge is just going exactly like Kath said. We had a very, very similar story in terms of diagnosis, moving from Geelong, 3 weeks in RCH, never heard of Prader-Willi, and then being told that in your world turning upside down in every way. In terms of the specific challenges that Austin has faced in his short life so far, would say 3 key challenges. One was probably a bit of surprise because I think the support materials and the community around PWS is, for a rare condition, is really quite amazing. For a new parent seeking information, it is out there around what you can typically expect. One that took me by surprise was reflux. My silent boy at 5 months, nobody could explain to me why 30 mils into his tube feed he was in distress, and a typical doctor couldn't tell that, but I could tell, he communicates with his heart rate and his breathing and his eyes, and I knew that he was really, really distressed. So that was a difficult period that was completely resolved with omeprazole, as simple as that is. The second is around obstructive sleep apnea. A sleep doctor recently said to me, Austin holds my record for the most amount of sleep studies, and that's not a record that I want to be proud of in any ways, but he's had 6 sleep studies in 18 months. Linked to the requirement, we fought really hard for the growth hormones to start when he was 3 months old, and we will never know has that contributed to developing obstructive sleep apnea, but I'm pleased to say that it was either his laryngomalacia, the floppy larynx, or enlarged adenoids that was contributing to that. So that surgery that he had completely resolved the obstruction. So now last sleep study is no obstruction, so no worries there. So that was really hard around anyone with seeing what Austin would breathe like would have been rushing their baby to emergency every day. So that was just what we lived with. And then the last is overall developmental delays, specifically in the gross motor. So Austin is not interested at all in crawling, and he's making that very clear. And we're just starting some early standing and walking practice. So, that's hard. Obviously on him, he works very hard. And then as a family, that's a big thing to overcome, and as they get older, it's more and more obvious the gap between his peers. So, yeah.
Thanks, Marnie. That's great. And great hair. Austin does have great hair.
Hi, I'm Amanda. We live here in Victoria, about 2 hours south. I am mum to 3 beautiful kids. Sam is nearly 15. Olivia, my beautiful daughter with Prader-Willi syndrome, is 13. And Leo, who is 10. We're a bit into our journey now. So listening to Marnie, brings back a lot. Liv is, my best friend. We do everything together. Yes, I'm a parent, and to distinguish between being a parent but then a therapist and everything else that comes in between has been really tricky. I'm getting better at it. I'm letting go, but it's hard. I don't think it'll ever get any easier. She's in grade 6, so very excited for year 7 next year, but with that comes a whole nother level of anxiety for me, and we just go day by day. She's a happy girl, she's ambitious, and that has gotten her so far in her hard life. Everything's hard, She walks, she talks. Dyspraxia has had a massive impact on her life, from very delayed speech to motor dyspraxia. So we continue to work on that every day. It makes every aspect of her life hard. And she constantly asks, why does my brain do that? So that's just one other part. Along with anxiety and, everything else that comes with PWS. But I don't know, she's got such a beautiful heart, and yeah, we just love it a bit. So I don't know, it's hard. So far down the journey, did we ever think a treatment was possible? Very early days we prayed, and then I suppose the further we've come along, we're like, in her lifetime, are we going to be lucky? And I don't know, we hope. Like, we can only hope and pray that for our beautiful kids, there is some relief to the hard life that they live, and which is becoming so much more evident for her now as she gets older. So we've seen the gap, but I just want life to be easier for her so that she can live a fulfilled life doing what she wants. Yeah, thank you.
Samantha.
Hi, my name's Libby. I live in Orange, in regional New South Wales, and I have Mabel, who is 6. She's the youngest of my 5 children. You can see from these pictures, Mabel is a little go-getter. She is really, really determined. In her eyes, she has completely nothing going on in her little body. She's just going to do every single thing that all her brothers and sisters can do. I think our biggest challenge at the moment for her is that we're starting to see some behaviours emerge in the terms of anxiety and the perseverance. And she, I think in herself, she really knows that that's happening as well, because sometimes I can even say to her, Mabel, just Mabes, we've spoken about it. She's like, yes, I know. And she often can really get quite frustrated with herself that she knows that her brain is just taking over her thoughts, I guess. Another big challenge for us is speech. She's been very delayed with apraxia. She's worked incredibly hard. We've done a lot of intensive therapy around that, and it is definitely starting to improve. But just for an example, she saw her principal in the school holidays at the coffee shop, and she was saying to her sister about how it's not fair that she missed out on going out the front for the assembly because she was, her birthday fell into the school holidays, and so they bring out all the kids and they all get to, the whole school gets to say happy birthday, but she missed out on that. And her sister said, go and tell her that. Go and tell her that you want to go up the front. And she said, she doesn't understand me. Like, there's no point, basically, because she's not going to understand. That particular woman doesn't understand what I say. So I think at 6, she's very aware. And I think that's what's heartbreaking for me, is that she has a level of intelligence. She's got a level of self-awareness is incredible. She refuses to say that anything to do with her tummy. If you talk to her about her tummy, about anything, she's like, it is not my tummy, it is my brain. And we have never ever spoken to her about her brain, but that she knows that it is her brain that's telling, and she will say that my tummy tells me I'm full, but it's my brain that says I want more lunch, I want more lunch, I want more lunch. So I think that's really hard when I can't really help her in that regard other than, talking to her. But yeah, she's otherwise great. She's really social. And as I said, she's really determined. She's told me that she is going to live in Sydney and I'm going to buy her a house and a pink car, and she's going to work at Napa where she goes to therapy. So she's got her life planned out for her, and given Mabel's determination, I hope that one day she can live out those dreams, and I think that's what's the hardest thing is knowing that if Prader-Willi just takes over, those dreams won't be possible for her. But we're very grateful. We've got a great team. Our wonderful endo is here, which for us, I think when you saw that people want their caregivers to be up to date, I feel incredibly lucky that we are around people that actually genuinely do care and want to stay up to date and things like that. So that's really great, and I think Mabel's lucky in that way that she has got a great support network around her. It makes me sad though, because not everyone has that, and I think this is what's important, that we can really drive that access for everybody living with Prader-Willi as well.
Thank you. It's great to hear of a 6-year-old with ambitions. A house in Sydney is no small ambition. It's awesome. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Catherine, and I have Alexander, who's 4 with PWS, and I also have a 6-year-old. We're from Perth. Alexander, much like some of the other children that have been spoken about, is just the happiest, loveliest, most engaged child. He's also got an awesome sense of humour. Unlike, I think, most 4-year-olds, he gets irony, he cracks jokes with his teachers, he's just hilarious. And he loves everyone he meets. He would hug everyone if I let him, I'm sure. I think the biggest challenge for Alexander at the moment, we're really fortunate we haven't encountered a lot of the typical issues to date. It's been a relatively smooth process to hear, but certainly his speech is his greatest challenge at the moment. He's got fantastic comprehension and his vocabulary is awesome, but people can't understand him because his articulation is not where it should be, and so that is so frustrating for him that he cannot communicate always what he wants, and particularly starting school this year, 3-year-old kindy, that's become more apparent, his frustration there. I think for us as parents, the hardest thing, other than obviously the early days, which are just hard, there's no two ways about it, was accessing services and knowing that we could push for more and better than we were originally told was what we would get necessarily. I don't know whether it's a particular problem for Perth, but we had a lot of problems accessing growth hormones early. We wanted to start soon, and we ended up with 6 specialists before we found someone who would start for 1. And so I think it's knowing what you can push and that you can ask for more, and something that's, I guess, where the Centre for Excellence really comes in, is building that knowledge, because I think if we didn't know we could ask and push and keep pushing and see new specialists, the outcomes might have been not what they are now. That was really hard, on top of dealing with the diagnosis at that stage, is also having to feel like you're fighting every day to get more and better services.
Thanks, Catherine. We will get Alexandra. Yeah. Great.
Yeah, hi, my name's Liz. I have one child, James, who is currently 42. So James was born in 1981 in Sydney, and he was initially diagnosed with an atypical cerebral palsy, and it wasn't until he was 2 that he was diagnosed with Prader-Willi, with the deletion type. Growth hormone wasn't available back then for children with Prader-Willi syndrome. So James's maximum height that he ever reached was 150 centimetres. So he's now 42, now 147 centimetres because of his severe scoliosis and kyphosis. His weight's 52 kilograms. Maximum he ever reached was 60. Haven't really had the weight problems. In terms of his education and employment, he went to a mainstream primary school with special ed aid. He then went to a special school from age 13. He then had some supported employment at the Sheraton Mirage up on the Gold Coast until mental illness posed a safety issue for him. And he's been in a disability day support service from 18 until now. So in terms of his living situation, his father died when he was 8, so he lived with me until he was 34. He's now in supported independent living with 3 others, all with severe physical, intellectual and mental health impairments. Right now in his life, and probably for the last 10 years, he's been unable to leave the house without a carer. He has no independence in the community at all. He's currently funded by the NDIA at about $560,000 a year, so huge expense. Socially, every family holiday, special occasion was being planned to accommodate James's needs, few without major meltdown, disruption, cessation to activities. And I just say though, I could have repeated what most of you repeated for the first, I don't know, maybe 15 years, but had photos back then would have been a very happy, smiling, engaged, friendly sort of person. That all changed dramatically once he got to adolescence. He has severe anxiety and agitation with any change at all in routines and expectations. Therefore, there's no spontaneity whatsoever in his life or our lives. He has a family member or a paid support worker to accompany him to everything he does. He doesn't have any friends, so I actually paid a huge amount of money to have a trained companion dog for him. In terms of diagnoses that he's had over his 42 years, obviously it's Prader-Willi syndrome, he's got borderline intellectual disability, he's got moderate hearing impairment, he's got severe kyphoscoliosis, he's got osteoporosis. Then we go on with all the psychiatric ones. Generalised anxiety disorder with obsessive and compulsive features, major depressive disorder with psychotic features, schizophrenia. Sorry, got to turn the page. And along with that, gastroparesis, slow gut disorder. He's had 13 emergency admissions to hospital, 2 of those ending up in ICU. 5 of them were for small bowel obstructions, which were actually pseudo-small bowel obstructions caused by antipsychotics, specifically clozapine. He's had 8 admissions for acute psychosis. So his first psychiatric assessment was when he was 14 years old. Since then he's seen 5 psychiatrists and 4 psychologists and had 2 hospitalisations while we were living in Queensland. We then moved to Melbourne about 13 years ago, and since then he's been assessed and treated by 15 different consultant psychiatrists at Austin Health, 3 psychologists, 5 admissions to the adult psychiatric unit, all via ambulance and with police escort. He's been prescribed 15 different psychotropic medications. After each mental health relapse and hospitalisation, his baseline function abilities, engagement with people, all sink lower and lower, never returns to baseline. He's had adverse reactions to many medications, haloperidol, SSRIs, SNRIs, clozapine. He has been involved in research. I think one of the early ones of the oxytocin trial with Professor Einfeld, and then one of the early trials of the exercise program at La Trobe. In terms of positive things that have been in James's life, despite all the mental illness, as you can see up in one of the photos up there on the right, he completed 10 consecutive Gold Coast Marathon walks. The first 4 years they were 10 kilometres, and the last 6 years they were 5 kilometres. He now walks 4 to 6 kilometres about 4 or 5 days a week. So he has always been very engaged in exercise. That's his go-to place, and it's our go-to place. It's the thing that reduces the anxiety more than anything. So he's usually out with his little dog Penny. See there? Walking. So, yes, so I guess that's not such a wonderful picture. I guess at 42, though, he has exceeded the average life expectancy, which I think is still around 37. Every time he's been in hospital, particularly in ICU and the really severe bowel obstruction, every time I thought, well, this is it. This is it now. But the resilience is amazing. Just bounces back. But anyway, that's James's story.
Thanks, Liz. Hi, my name's Vanessa. I'm from Canberra, and my son Angus is sitting here with me today. Angus is 25, so he was born in 1997. He was around 8 weeks old when he was diagnosed. I also had we thought he had a diaphragmatic hernia when I was pregnant with Angus at his 18-week ultrasound, so he was already on the radar. Once he was born, and I say this, so it's like he was born into a room of people. So Angus is a people person, a cast of thousands in the ward. Anyway, it turned out I ended up going home after a week with Angus. They couldn't tell me what was wrong, obviously, but we knew something was wrong. His chromosomes looked very normal. We had the professor of the NICU who, anyway, I don't even want to go there because it's just, you meet some really strange people when you're in this situation. So anyway, went home. Angus started to lose weight because he couldn't suck, and it was the era of breast is best. And so Angus was quite dehydrated and got the UTI and all those sorts of things, which, when you've got a child that's floppy and can't suck, formula's not the poison that they make it out to be. A baby that is well fed and rehydrated and their brains are working well is what's best for the baby. So I went home, tried to breastfeed him. It was a nightmare. Got back into NICU because we had nurses that would come to the home whilst he was at home, and so got rushed back in, and the next minute, he's being fed this evil formula, and then I was like, well, if he doesn't have that, he's going to die. So they got him sorted, and then there was a round of doctors that used to come around every day and ask me how he was going, and I'd always be really positive about it. And because again, you're talking about the eyes and how they're so reactive, and it was like I could look into his eyes and say, everything's going to be, he was saying to me, everything's going to be all right, Mum, I'm just a little bit slower than everyone else. And one particular day they came around and I was really positive about Angus, and they shot me down again. And in those days I didn't swear, and I just turned around, and I won't say what I said, and I said, stop asking me, it's horrible. You shoot me down every single time. You just do what you need to do. And anyway, the physiotherapist who was standing behind them gave me a hug afterwards and said, well done you, because it was so depressing. And he was in Bay 4 in the NICU, which meant he was next, you're on your way out, and they just didn't know what to do with Angus because he didn't have Down syndrome. He wasn't a baby that came from parents who took drugs or alcohol during the pregnancy. So he was this kind of enigma in the corner, which was really tough. And so he was there for, I think it was 3 weeks, and I literally crawled up in a ball and said to my husband, we're going to take him to Sydney or Melbourne because this is crazy. They keep poking and prodding him and no one can tell us what's going on. And so they fessed up and said, righto, the geneticist is coming tomorrow. We'll go through the process of testing him. And they told us it was Prader-Willi syndrome, and they were testing for, and they told us not to Google it. We're like, yeah, righto. So the families Googled it and were like, and so I was in this blissful state. And then I got a phone call from our paediatrician, and he told me over the phone, because he didn't want me to wait all weekend to find out what it was. And I know I probably would have got a packet of ciggies and a bottle of gin and, would have crawled into a ball. And anyway, so we then went on the journey of Prader-Willi syndrome, and, I met the beautiful Georgina Luffnan, and, I had many sessions with her just beside myself. And Angus then went to preschools, I did a lot of therapy. I was doing 50,000 Ks a year, and that's in Canberra, driving him from here, there and everywhere just so that he had the best start. And whilst, and we talked about this last night, it's a very isolating syndrome. You are on your own. Nobody gets it. Unless they're in it with you, they don't get it. And so then he went to a mainstream primary school that had its own little classroom, which I loved. So he could also mingle with the mainstream students, but he had support in his classroom. He then went into a supported high school called the Woden School, and then when he was in Year 9, teacher pulled us aside and said, look, Angus needs more stimulation. He needs to go somewhere else. So we ended up getting him into Marist, and he did Year 10 to Year 12 through Marist, which was great. But still, you know, there's issues, especially around the food. And we were told Angus was probably one of the highest food seekers they'd ever come across. And that was really distressing, and Angie knows this, and he got to 200 kilograms. He would go out at night, he would, you know, we bought a business for him in Fish Week, so that a workwear business, so he could work with us because we knew the eating was an issue, food seeking. He would manage to, you know, we'd be serving customers and he'd like take off out the back and head off down to the servo and grab jars of peanut butter and biscuits and lollies and all sorts of things, because as he was getting bigger, his tracksuit pants were getting bigger and the pockets were getting bigger, so you could stuff more things into your pockets. So Angus knew, he was very remorseful about these things, and he has talked about the brain, haven't you, Angus, about how your Prader-Willi brain talks to you. But I am so proud of Angus. We got him into supported living in Canberra in this amazing house with, and Livability provides the support, and he has day support, GGs and DIS, and both organisations have really deep dived into Prader-Willi syndrome, and I feel Angie is living his best life at the moment. He lives with another fellow who is peg-fed, so no food in the house, no snacks, no wallets to get to, because it's always lurking, isn't it, Ang? Yeah. So he has lost 64 kilos. He does personal training twice a week. He does Zumba. Plays basketball. He's very accomplished with Special Olympics. Angus has always been very interested in sport, and sport was his currency. So even when he was really tiny, he'd go up to people and say, in his own language, but who do you follow? And if, you know, you follow, we're NRL, but also AFL as well. But say you followed, you know, Collingwood, and he'd say, well, the Swans they beat you this many times, and it was amazing. So footy and sport was his currency, so he could communicate with people and had something to talk about. And Special Olympics has given him that opportunity to play the sports that he loves. So he plays basketball, 10-pin bowling, table tennis, golf. He's represented Australia in soccer and basketball. He goes to national games, and he's played Paralympic table tennis, which you know, that's where those amazing Paralympic athletes are that you see in the Olympics, the Paralympics. So, you know, from that horrible phone call we received back in 1997 or 98 from someone in Prader-Willi, New South Wales, who gave us the darkest information about Prader-Willi. Yeah, and it's a very hard, lonely road for parents and families, and there's nothing like a sibling to be an advocate as well. But yeah, that's our journey. But yeah, Angus is doing. He still has, you know, it's always lurking, and behaviour's always lurking. Tiredness is his absolute enemy. It always has been, and Angus likes a very, very, very structured day. He likes to know, like even going away on holidays, he needs to know when we're going to be having breakfast, lunch and dinner. He'll already Google it and see what is on the menu, and yeah. Anyway, that's it from me.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. I hear all of that, Angus, and I think, what was I doing with my life when I was 25? Representing Australia in multiple sports, you know, you've really impressive achievements, really amazing. Yeah.
And the other thing is, again, meeting Kath, and there's real hope, and, you know, I feel excited for the younger families that, you know, life hopefully will be that little bit better and nicer and easier for your loved ones, because they are the most beautiful humans on this earth and they deserve to live really well as well. So, but thanks to the Research Foundation and the scientists, it's just given me so much hope. It's great.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. And I think that listening to the different stories of you with your kids at different ages, there's obviously already been amazing change. So, Liz, you were saying that, you know, when James was a child, there wasn't growth hormones available, there weren't various other treatments available. So we're slowly seeing change, but obviously there's ways to go. And it was really important listening to you all of you then, just to kind of ground what everyone's doing in families' lived experience, which is what I want to talk about today. My name's Cathy. I'm a researcher at the university in the School of Population and Global Health, but I'm here with my MISH hat on. So MISH is the Methods and Implementation Support for Clinical and Health Research Hub at the university. It's a very tedious, long acronym. MISH is a group that really provide method support across a whole range, so biostatistics, clinical trials, different health economics, different domains, and I lead the co-design and implementation effectiveness node of MISH. And really what that is about is working with patients and families and clinicians to collaboratively develop solutions and trial new interventions. And really what I want to talk about today is a bit how we might go about that, drawing on your experience of being involved in research or not, which is also actually really important to hear from. So first of all, what is co-design? So I thought I'd start with co-design, even though that's only, I guess, part of the spectrum of patient and family involvement in research, because co-design is increasingly, I see a lot of people using co-design in their ethics applications or their grant applications, and I think, is this actually co-design? So it's a word that's being thrown around a lot that I just want to unpack what it is. And it's not to say that co-design is always what you want to do, but just, I guess, a bit of clarity around what we're talking about. Because we hear different words like patient and public involvement. That's the language you tend to hear from the UK. If you're from the US, you might hear more about community-based participatory research. That's a well-established I'll bring them all back in a minute. I'm sorry. Community academic partnership is another terminology that would be used. Patients' lived experience. People talk a lot about working with lived experience researchers, consumer participation. All of these words get thrown around really in the same family of approaches that includes co-design, co-creation, co-production. And really what I want to talk about is community engagement and co-design as the key things to focus on today. So co-design is a participatory process that brings people together to try and address health and social care issues, to design solutions and improve outcomes. And it can be used for designing research itself. So it might be that you're not quite sure what the issue is, how you might go about exploring an issue as a researcher. So listening to those amazing women talking today, and also Angus, because you've done so much patient advocacy on the telly, and I've watched you on the telly. Very impressive. I was struck by some of the similarities in what you were talking about. Some of it was about the experience of your kids. Some of it was about your own experience and the kind of anxiety and isolation that families and parents experience. And so that might be a research problem that actually needs an intervention developed to support families who have kids with Prader-Willi. So it might be about working with families to think about how can we try and improve knowledge and understanding, but it might be also about designing and implementing interventions and looking at your roadmap and the principles that you outlined, Diane, where you're talking about unmet need. The only way you can understand what unmet need is from a family's point of view is to ask them. So you've got a great baseline with your survey that you've already done in terms of co-design research. You were also talking about uplifting quality of life. Again, the only way to understand what quality of life means to people who live with Prader-Willi and their families is to ask them and to listen to what they have to say, rather than have assumptions about, I've got this new whiz-bang idea. Rather, it's about listening to the families about what will improve their quality of life, and then thinking about with them what services or systems might need to be improved or could we develop to address those quality of life outcomes. And then the bit that often gets forgotten in co-design or community engaged research is actually the monitoring and evaluation when you put an implementation into practice. So people often come up with a thing, they do the thing, but they actually forget to ask the families or the patients or in this case, people living with Prader-Willi, what they think themselves about this intervention. Did it work for them rather than did it work for the clinician? Of course, the clinicians are important in this because you need to have a team to work together, but it's really the lived experience of the patients or people with Prader-Willi that you're trying to uplift in your roadmap. So the principles of co-design are pretty straightforward. There's a lot of different guidebooks and resources out there you can read on co-design, but they have shared principles around sharing power. So there is a kind of a bit of a saying in the co-design world, there's no co-design without co-deciding. So it is about being prepared to share power over decision-making in outcomes around health interventions. You know, what are the priorities and what might be the best way of going about that. It's about prioritising relationships. I was so glad to hear some of the parents of younger children talk about you've got really supportive teams around you, and great that it's in Torquay because that's a regional area and that doesn't always happen. That, you know, I think Catherine from Perth, you were perhaps talking about difficulty accessing services and you know, Perth being more isolated perhaps, and as capital cities go, a slightly smaller capital city, maybe that might be part of the challenge in making sure that you've got supports around you. But that relationship between families and their care team is hugely important, but also relationship between families and scientists, between families and researchers, in terms of understanding what are the problems that you want solved, and you listed a whole range of things that were different according to the age of your kids. So the different, you know, the difficulties that James is facing, and he's had a pretty, you know, a really hard road. Liz is quite different to the challenges that a younger child where there's different treatments available might be facing. Also prioritising, I think, relationships with each other. You've got a lot to offer each other as peer supports of parents going through this, and you know that far better than anyone else. The other principles are around using participatory approaches. So instead of researchers often can be very good at coming up with research tools that extract information. So, you know, in health-related research, that might be looking at blood, you know, markers of cardiovascular disease or, you know, onset of diabetes, blood sugars, or it might be around measuring sleep, you know, 18 sleep studies in a very short space of time. So it can be about sort of extracting biological information without necessarily thinking about what other things might be important for this family, which could be working with them about charting quality of life over time. You know, it might be a sort of more of a narrative approach to doing research. So thinking about other ways of capturing information that help scientists and clinicians really understand the experience of that family. And then the other principle of a co-designed participatory type of approach is to try and build the skills of families, of clinicians, to work with each other. So people often think that the capacity building is only on the family side. Listening to you guys speak, that was an incredibly articulate set of parents who have a very clear understanding of the health challenges that their children are facing and are able to articulate that really well. It's also about building capacity of researchers to work with families, because that's not often what they're trained in. And sometimes scientists can be very anxious about working with families because they are worried about raising expectations, they're worried about not being able to, you know, it can be quite confronting to deal with the things that your profession hasn't been able to solve when you're, particularly for, and clinician researchers can really find that difficult when you've been trained to fix things, and some things are difficult to fix or can't be fixed, and that can be very difficult. So it's building capacity on both sides. I guess what I would say that what co-design or genuine engagement is not a consultation. It's not a one-off thing where you might do an interview and go away and take that information and go and develop your intervention. It's an iterative process, and by that I mean something that evolves and changes over time as new information comes in, that genuinely brings people together to try and share ideas and generate solutions. It's not low cost or research on the cheap. So I do a lot of peer research with women around a whole range of issues, and people think, oh, peer researchers, as in people with the condition that we might be researching, will be cheaper than academically trained researchers. Absolutely not. You've got to, if you really want to genuinely involve community members as co-researchers, you've got to pay for translators, you've got to pay for transport or childcare, or there's a lot of those sorts of costs, as well as bringing people's skills up to scratch and making sure people are confident to do this research together with you. And it's not a quick fix, which is back to the first point. So just thinking about carefully, is this the right way for you to go? But I really encourage researchers to think about co-design, community-engaged, participatory ways of working, especially for a complex condition like Prader-Willi, where there's different families and different people living with Prader-Willi will have such different experiences. I think that's perhaps maybe the key message I want people to take away is you had 5 families there at different stages of life, but also with a whole lot of different circumstances which will influence their child's pathway through life. And so we shouldn't make assumptions about where people are going to end up. People constantly surprise you, and we've got to leave space for those surprises, and to recognise that everyone will be on quite a different journey, and the only way to understand that is to listen to families. There is very good evidence around why we should be doing this kind of work, though. Partly it's kind of, for me, an ethical or a moral way of working, in that it's a social justice and rights perspective for people to have a say in decisions and research that has such a big impact on their life. But that complex problems also require innovative solutions. That means sometimes ideas that come from places that often I'm a researcher, I know you're often looking where. What is that story about? You look for your keys under the light, even though because that's what or everything if you have a hammer, everything you see is a nail. Sometimes I think the most innovative solutions do come from community members I work with. There's good research evidence that doing participatory, co-designed or community-based type research strengthens the rigour, it strengthens the relevance and the reach of that research. And that is something everyone here as a scientist will be interested in, particularly where increasingly funders want to see impact. So if you're really wanting to have an impact, you're wanting to increase the relevance, the reach and the rigour of what you're doing. And as I say, increasingly a funder requirement. And if anyone's wanting to see some of these studies that show the evidence of the impact of co-design or participatory ways of working, I'm very happy to be contacted afterwards. I didn't want to put up a boring long list of references on this kind of slide. But there's very good evidence that this is an effective way of working to solve complicated problems and generate realistic and pragmatic solutions. So sometimes evidence that can come from, say, trials can work very well in a controlled trial environment, but it doesn't work outside that controlled trial environment. So if we're wanting to understand how things are going to work in the real world, that is about working closely with families and listening to what they have to say. So I'm going to, for the last, how much I've got, 10 minutes or so, I want to just put some questions to families. So do you mind if I drag you back up the thing? Sorry. So I'm interested, a few of you mentioned that you had been involved in research in the past. If you could share with us briefly how that experience was and anything that could have been improved about that experience.
Angus did a research trial through the Charlie Perkins, is it Institute or I just can't. Oh, okay. Through RPA. Charles Perkins Centre, that's it.
Thank you.
And so Angus and I would go up, I think it was every 6 weeks or something like that, I can't remember. It was a while ago. And yeah, like we used it as a fun sort of like getaway together, so it was quite cool. But during the research trial, they worked out halfway through that it wasn't working. Whatever it was, like the controlled and the placebo were having the same. So, but I think being a part of it gave us hope, you know, that, And because Angus also in the Canberra hospital, when he was much younger, right up to I think about 12, he used to participate in the, it's for the doctors becoming paediatricians, and they'd have to go around, and like guess what whatever they had diagnosis is. Some of them would get Prader-Willi syndrome. So, and that was the thing. Like we did it every year because, again, it was just someone hearing about Prader-Willi syndrome. So he was a bit of a pioneer in that forum. So yeah, we used to do that maybe a couple of times a year, and he'd get a toy, so it was a great and Angus always loved being poked and prodded. But I also wanted to say too about right from the start, I learned very early on to have, I used to call them my circle of friends, and they were medical people that we would only work with. We would not, and that was your GP, endocrinologist, whoever, therapist. We never went outside the circle of friends, because as soon as we'd go to a different GP, it was just they didn't get it. Yeah. So you learn very early on to keep your circle of friends very tight.
Yeah, and that's a good message for researchers in terms of not interfering with your trusted relationships that you've formed.
Yeah.
And I think that is something researchers need to think about, is what impact might being involved in research have on these relationships you've carefully crafted.
Because it's very different how you manage your child with Prader-Willi.
Yep, great. Thanks, Vanessa. Anyone else been involved in research? Liz?
Yes, sorry. The research that James has been in was pretty much at a distance. I think we lived on the Gold Coast. We went to Sydney a couple of times for Stuart Einfeld's one about the oxytocin. But I think that was just initial questionnaire type things, and then it was all pretty much done remotely. Like,
yeah.
You know,
Yeah, we did that too. Yeah, that's right.
You know, filling in questionnaires and things like that. But I have got a comment from another family person who wasn't able to be here, who's got an adult son, who said researchers probably need to think about, like in her case, she's not the, can't be, well, he won't allow her to be the guardian. So she can only attend medical appointments or appointments with the researcher if her son allows it.
Yeah.
And if she is there and she goes to correct this information that her son is giving, she brought it out. And she is worried that if the researchers or medical people are reliant totally on the person with Prader-Willi syndrome giving an accurate presentation of things they're doing or experiencing, whatever, then they may well get very inaccurate data. So she was just advising it's always good to have a reliable witness of, you know, like I understand about the co-design and participation, all that, and they need to be part of it, but I think you also need to really check the accuracy.
Yeah, and I think with co-design, it's about the people who have most at stake, and families have definitely got a hell of a lot of at stake here. So absolutely working with people with Prader-Willi, but families are key as well, and in this instance, absolutely key. Yeah, thanks, Liz. That's a great point. Has anyone? Yeah.
We've done a few with the Murdoch Children's here at RCH.
Yeah.
A few when Liv was younger. I can't even remember, but around was behavioural autism sort of stuff, and the most recent was the wearable devices.
Okay.
So we've had great experience, and I suppose I come from a place of if we can do anything to help, please count us
So what
in.
made it a great experience for you, Amanda?
The latest one with the wearable devices, they were lovely. Just lovely, and I felt. So we went in there a few times for them to do the actual trial where she had, or whatever it was, and the follow up with just me was, I don't know, I just felt heard as a parent about everything. So that was, it was an enjoyable experience.
So again, in terms of our message for researchers, making sure that you have the time and the space to hear people, because I was struck by your language, Vanessa, about, what did you say, you shut me down every single time, when Angus was younger. So that making sure that there's, because it takes time to listen to people and
I
give
think
them
the follow-up,
space.
I mean, you convince your child that this is a worthy thing to do and that it will help other people.
Yeah.
But then that follow-up,